the joy of these has just been partnering with a great co-creator, giving them the seed of an idea, and then building something organic from the ground up. I mean, none of these books were things that like I pitched to any other artist. So no
Right.
book out of all the ones you'll see come out from us at comiXology or the book at IDW, none of that was like, hey, this is a pitch I have going around. Who's right for it? It was Jamal and I hanging out and talking about, in 2016, 2017, what it was like growing up in the city versus growing up in the city now, and the feeling that our kids who are the same age, our oldest kids, are growing up in an era where collectivism seems, and a sense of kind of communal togetherness, and the feeling that their ingenuity is something bred of sharing and
Mm.
and not the opposite, not solipsism and that stuff is gone. That to me, or at least is diminished. We wanted to tell a story that celebrates the idea of a symposium and a shared history and a secret kind of legacy among inventors, that we're all doing it to kind of create amazing things and wonders that would push mankind forward, and then meet a whole symposium of alien worlds that's doing the same, and tell something about why it's so important for young people to still believe in the possibilities of collectivism, even in a moment when, and ingenuity, even in a moment when it seems like things are incredibly depressing
Yeah.
and scary. So each book was built that way. Like the book Canary with Dan and I became friends a few years ago, when we got marooned at a con together with it was us and Donnie Cates and Matt Rosenberg, and they were having a Hot Wheels convention at
I
the
saw the
hotel.
photo from that where you sort of went upstairs and gate crashed the convention.
Well, Dan decided he wanted to pretend to be a connoisseur of Hot Wheels, and I was
Right.
like, "We're gonna get caught." He was like, "I'm doing it." So when we became friendly, we both have a lot of the same touchstones in terms of cultural sort of events that we love, and movies and TV shows
Yeah.
and stuff. And we're both big Western fans. And the thing that
Right.
I think both of us love about Westerns is that the best Westerns are often really sort of tied to the moments in which they came out, as a kind of prism through which to see the American character, So you get like The Searchers in the 60s, in the
Mm.
50s into the 60s, when civil rights is really at the front of the kind of American imagination and project. And then Josie Wales during Vietnam, and things like The Wild Bunch in the 70s, when
Yeah.
things are kind of feel like they're entropic and falling apart.
Yeah,
And
man.
so the idea of doing a Western right now was appealing to both of us as, well, can you do a Western that uses the Western genre and the template, and then become something very dark and mind bending and genre twisting? Because that's the way you would kind of do a Western in times that feel
Yeah.
almost like incapable of being contained within a simple Western anymore. So that was that. And then, Barnstormers was Lisa Datula and I were, I've been friends a long time, since I started going to Thought Bubble. It was one of the first conventions to invite me when I was starting out. And I'm, a deep fan to this day, and I'm going to try and go this year as well. And back then we had a conversation where I was telling her how much I love this phenomenon of barnstorming, and I'd written in prose stories about it, because it's a odd moment when like young people are sort of, especially working class young people, are watching this sort of wealthy party in the Roaring Twenties, and yet all of these kind of
Mm.
mechanisms are in place to disenfranchise labor, and the things they're living in between these cataclysmic moments of World War One and the influenza pandemic, and then the depression and the crash.
Yeah.
And there's a feeling of fear, I think, and desperation among young people at that time that doesn't translate into the kind of fun Roaring Twenties iconography you're always seeing in the Jazz Age. And barnstorming to me is such a perfect weird metaphor, where it's these young men and women taking these sort of decommissioned war machines, these planes, and then turning them into this beautiful dance in the sky, where they jump from plane to plane, and they're doing loop-de-loops and climbing out on the wings, and the government starts regulating against it because they thought it was making the airlines look bad and all of this stuff. And it's this odd kind of fleeting moment where it's beautiful and desperate and scary and everything. And I looked together and we sent references back and forth. And so the fun of these books is that like everyone is kind of organically built with the co-creator in a way that's unique to us, you know, so none of it is like, here's a script for this one, here's a script for that one, like that.
I think it really shows. I think with, you know, with Tula Lottie's artwork, I think you really hit gold there. It's, for me,
Thanks.
and it'll come out in my reviews now, it's very evocative of the sort of films like The Great Waldo Pepper. And I mean that not just because
I love
of the
that
era,
movie
it's
so much. Robert Redford, and oh my God.
Brilliant. But it's also the fact it's that kind of soft focus artwork that's evocative of a lot of the films like The Sting that are set in that era. And it just brought me back to those, you know, like you mentioned, those cultural milestones when I was growing up, watching them on TV, looking at the soft focus that was often used in those films. It brought it all back to me. The sort of attention to detail that you've got on Barnstormers is absolutely amazing. It's whether or not we can talk any further about, because obviously it is the Great Waldo Pepper meets Bonnie and Clyde, but there's another element to it, isn't it, that I just wasn't ready for.
Well, it's also, and that's, you know, whether or not that's happening or that's in the mind of all of it is sort of, but it's tied to, it's about, the main character is someone who feels he had a vision and he had an accident, and during that accident he had a vision of, while he's trying to, not to give too much away, but he works at this factory that's one of the first soda companies at the time, and it has this big sort of sign outside, and as he's working on that, he's shocked, and as he's shocked, he has a vision of the world as this endless mechanical sort of rigged machine against people like him and Tilly, and you know, people of kind of not of great means all across the country, and it becomes a physical manifestation that follows him in a way too. And whether or not it's real is a fun part of the story, but it's that I wanted it to be something that lets Tula sort of show all the amazing things that she's able to do, and you know, surprises you along the way that way. So and I'd also like throw my, you know, tip my hat to the great like Richard Starkings in the lettering department as well, because he came up, I mean, the way he was like, let's figure out something. So I said, I'd love to do something that feels at once modern and old timey, and he played around to figure out a way to make the text look like it's printed typewriter style on the art, and then balloon it in ways that felt maybe a little bit anachronistic and fun in that way. And down to the way, if you look, he got lettered Canary also, but he took a completely different style for that, where it's very harsh and very kind of jagged old school lettering. And so the detail that he put in, and that, you know, all the co-creators put in, like, I think it's clear from like Jamal's work and Dan's work, as well as Tula's, like everyone, you know, nobody's phoning it in. Everybody is really trying to make something special they're proud of. And I'm very honored to be a part of the books. I feel like I could basically write the phone book on any of them, and they would,
Jamal's
be
got
good.
a very fun style that I saw him use on The Wrong Earth. So seeing him on this sort of kind of, you know, teenage adventure, but with pets, in the same tradition as, you know, Spider-Man, Miss Marvel, and like you say, more of a collective community. You know, we've got the sort of the global village really becoming the global town square now, thanks to the internet, thanks to these inventions. And there's some great fun moments in that first issue as well. Each of the three comics have a very different style. Certainly, we touched on Barnstormers, but certainly for me, Canary, I mean, Barnstormers feels cinematic in the old Hollywood silver screen of like the 60s, you know, the Great Waldo Pepper and the films I mentioned. But as the films
for one sec, Ollie, hang on. Let me. I might, if it's me, I'll just move closer to the house. You broke up for a split second after you said after the books. I'm just going to move closer to our internet. You said after the books have a different feel, and with Dudley Datson, you were saying that you know, Jamal, you saw him on The Wrong Earth, and there's a feeling of collectivism, and then you broke up.
And that so for him, I was saying we're in a sort of world now where the global village that they talked about in the 60s has now become almost a global town square. But with all of your books, with Barnstormer, it reminds me of those Hollywood films that I mentioned earlier from the late 60s, early 70s. But you, obviously, as one of the co-creators on Canary, hit the nail on the head. For me, this wasn't a spaghetti western I was watching. This was those classic westerns like The Searcher, like Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. And for me, it's a very tense first issue because of the use of panoramic views, because of maybe a lack of dialogue in places. And I can see the horror element building up slowly, like in almost like a good British rural horror, but an American version of that.
Those are some of my favorites. And honestly, Dan and I spoke about the idea of doing something that felt more immersive and sort of, I think it's an interesting moment for horror because I feel, especially horror overseas and in Great Britain in particular, it feels like there's more of an attention to kind of the emotional anxiety, the psychological build. And in so many different genres, it does feel like it's almost kind of echoing some of the priorities of the 70s, the late 60s and early 70s, when I think the hope and the sort of the utopian visions of the 60s began to crash against some of the realities of the 70s. And there was a very sort of down moment, and there's a kind of reinvestigation of all those things. And the genres are busted wide open where you get all these great films that sort of, from The Godfather to, like you were saying, I mean, Peckinpah stuff and Taxi Driver and all of it, where it starts to sort of really wrangle with conventions and take apart genres and then rebuild them in new ways. And for us, I mean, that's the project. Canary takes a lot of risks when you see it get to issue 3 and 4 and where it goes. I mean, I want it to feel a little bit like some of the things I liked about a show like True Detective in its first season before it started to kind of veer off in that way. But that feeling of building horror, that dread that I think people are really nailing in horror these days in A24 films and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to some of the stuff I grew up with in the 80s that was more, a little bit more bombastic.
Slash. Jump.
Yeah, I mean, that's fun. But I mean, that feeling of something that's really unsettling on a deep level, that more of that kind of, that Polanski and that feeling of like building dread from a place of safety. So that's what we're kind of going for there, and all the books are personal in that regard too. I mean, like I said, they're all in different ways about this moment, and they're built, with co-creators that have a lot of strong feelings about the state of things. So as much as sometimes some of them kind of translate those feelings into more of a comic book sort of lexicon or set of icons, like Dudley is much more sort of on the surface, like fun. It's designed for all ages. It's meant to be a book that leans into, for the first time in my career, like more YA sort of a feel.
It did feel like that reading it.
Yeah, well, that was the idea, was to try 3 genres. Like, if the first wave of the comiXology books, like We Have Demons, Clear, and Night of the Ghoul, the novelty with those was to do creator own with other creators that I've worked with extensively in the past, but I've never done books that we own together with. So leaning into kind of some of the priorities that you've seen us use on work that we've done, like Greg, obviously We Have Demons is big fists, fangs, gore, action, heart. And then
blockbuster horror.
Right. And then exactly. And then with Francesco, we did some Swamp Thing, but we did Black Mirror. We're horror, so doing classic horror, the stuff that we love, is comfort zone. And with Francis, even though I haven't really worked extensively in sci-fi or noir, like we did speculative sci-fi with Justice League, and so it's a zone that you've seen us be in. But with this wave, the goal was to work with creators that I haven't worked with a lot before, and then try things that were genres I haven't really worked in quite as much. So for me, in all ages, Dudley is like an all ages, meant to be an all ages book for the kind of book that our kids, Jamal and I, would read at, when we were talking about starting it. Now they're a little bit older, 15 and 16, but when they were like 13, 14, and it still reads well for adults, hopefully. Canary is the prism of a Western looking at today, and historical fiction is Barnstormers. So Yeah, it's trying to put my money where my mouth is. Like, one of the things I love this year has been the teaching, and the big tenets of the teaching are, you got to write the story that you would love to pick up and read today. I don't care what it is. And then secondarily, you've got to try and stay exciting to yourself as a creator. And this is that for me. It's sort of trying not to do the things I know I've done and know how to do, but push a little bit and try things, work with people that are going to make me better on the page and off, for all the kinds of things that are inspiring about their work and who they are. So
I also like the fact that there's a whole group of writers. I've had this conversation with Ram V as well, that you're very confident and able to break the only 200 words per page rule. I really enjoy all the necessary exposition, whether it's in Barnstormers, whether it's in sort of Canary, because it helps build the world, it helps establish characters. And what I loved about Barnstormers, how you captured the voice of the 20s as well. It's not just the the visuals, it's the voice as well. It's the beautiful people that seem to exude from the page, which again reminded me of the Robert Redfords of that. And sort of when our main female protagonist first appears, it's a stunning piece.
it's stunning,
Absolutely
right?
stand out. It's a really iconic panel already in my mind. I
I
know I'm
love it.
overselling it, but it was.
No.
I mean, part of getting into reviewing, part of doing this is because of the love of comics I still have. And also I like good value for money. So if I can read a comic that takes me more than 10 minutes and look over the artwork, Dan's gritty artwork is such a treat. And you can tell that both you and he are such great fans of that era of Hollywood films. You know your stuff.
Well, thanks, man. I mean, the goal with these, honestly, I don't feel like I have anything. Yeah, I'm not doing them for other people. I'm doing them to make something that I'm proud of with creators that I wanted to work with. And I think part of the benefit or the privilege of being at this point in my career is that I can take the mitigated risks of being able to do books that, aren't necessarily designed to be the big direct market heavy hitting thing necessarily, the way I had to when I was at DC. And I could still do it when I want with a Nocterra or that stuff if I have an idea that fits that. But I don't feel the need to be writing for anyone else. And the idea of going in there with co-creators that force me to adapt both the way I write, because the way I work with them is to ask them, how do you like to work? Do you like full script? Do you like, Marvel style? Like, what do you like? Some of them, like Jamal, we get on the phone a lot. Some of them, like Dan likes to talk a lot and then break off and take a lot of space and have more of a format document. Lisa or Tula loves to do tons of designs and get into the world of the place first. And all of that's a joy. It makes me feel like I'm learning. I'm growing as a writer to try these different things. So the fun is, there's nothing in any of these books that I don't feel like I'm sure there are things that, I'm going to miss on, but there's nothing for lack of trying to make something we love. Like, there's nothing that's like, hey, we need to put out more IP, or I need to put out a book that's, to have the joy is just being able to try new things and tell stories with people that make you, better for doing them as a team. So it's been a blast. I mean, I would keep doing this forever. I mean, I love having a foot in the direct market, don't get me wrong, but this sort of freedom that comes with not having to sort of necessarily do the same things to grind to push a book in the direct market at number one past a certain number so that it's solvent, and then you have the money to finish the book, is a nice thing too. Like, I like all of it. Like, for me, I think one of the reasons, not to get too industry, whatever, but that we wanted to do this with comiXology. And I approached everybody, beforehand and said, do you want to do your book? Because we started all the books kind of in a bit of a cloud before comiXology came along. And I was like, how do you want to do? Do you want to do this book at Image? Do you want to do this book Kickstart? You want to? And when comiXology came along and was very about like, look, we love the ideas and we'd like to take a whole bunch. I went to each creator and I said, how do you want to do this? And then the pandemic hit, and I talked to them again, and I was like, look, this is my belief. I don't know if you follow that, if you believe it too, but my kids, they consume entertainment now subscription based, like, and then they buy the collectible. They spend all their money on the collectible version, physical thing that they want in their room based on all the browsing they did subscription wise. They do it with vinyl, for example. They've got both love vinyl. They both love like, you know, comics, manga. They read tons of manga on Shonen Jump and, you know, Crunchyroll. And then all of a sudden here come
Yeah.
all the volumes. So for me, it was like, let's try and do something that gives people as much value as we can to be able to browse and read the book. So if you have, you know, a a comiXology Unlimited subscription or Prime, you can read everything for the price of one book, like everything we're doing, everything we've done. And you can see all the stuff we're putting into it, all the time and effort. So we're trying to give you more than it's worth. But then if you love them, you can go collect them and they're going to be extra back matter, extra designs, extra pages, the scripts included sometimes, like just to see, because part of the project, and then I'll shut up about it, is that at this point in our careers, my career at least, I'll speak for myself, like, but the people I'm working with, you want to try things that you think are also going to strengthen the industry. And I believe that one of the things that's really a problem is the way in which the direct market and digital are kept competitive constantly by making digital sort of same day and date, same price, all of that, because ultimately it's going to hurt print. Because on a rainy day and I don't want to go to the comic store, I'm going to buy it digitally. You know what I mean? Like, and then I might or might not buy it that way. But if I can browse it digitally, then I want to go to the comic store for all kinds of reasons, to buy more stuff by the creator I just browsed, or by the collected, or by the, you know, merch. So I don't know. I mean, I get what I'm trying to say is I feel good about what we're trying to do on a bunch of levels. I feel above all, like creatively, I couldn't be prouder of the books. But even on a kind of pragmatic level, I like what we're trying to do over there. While still, you know, again, I still have a lot of stuff in the direct market alone, but I like the idea of, if it works, and it seems to be,
Yeah.
of trying to point a way towards possibly a model that in some corners of the comic industry might work well, you know?
I think the way it works for me as a fan of comics, a lot of the graffiti artists I work with for my festival, they're now asking me, I dropped out of comics, what do you recommend? Have you got an Amazon Prime account? Yes, I have. Well, why don't you have a look at this, this, and this, because it's free. And then they're old school like me, then they will hunt it out for, you know, particularly your stuff in Dark Horse, they will buy the trade on my recommendation. So I think it's a great model for word of mouth as well.
I
So I
agree.
know a
And
lot of
honestly,
my
one of the
friends are picking it up.
well, and one of the cool things is like when you look in some of these subscription companies like comiXology, you know, you get a subscription and you have access to all these creators that made me want to write, and up and coming ones that, you know, I'm learning from now. Like, you like Rom, for example, like
Yeah.
Rom, I'm like, one of the big things I can't wait to do at San Diego is meet him, because we've talked and Zoomed a bunch of times
You've
about
never met.
Batman.
Oh, he's a great
Uh,
guy. He's a
oh,
great guy.
I love him. We Zoom when he first started. I wrote him, just told him how much I really loved some of his early stuff, and then when he got on Detective, we Zoomed again. I mean, and we Zoomed. He wanted to run Batman stuff, and we talked all about that. And I told him how great I think all the stuff is going to be, and it is. It's going to be
Yeah,
fantastic, and
I'm looking forward to his run on Detective. I must admit, he's
it's
killing it. Him
great.
and
And
Mike
his Swamp
Perkins,
Thing,
killing it on Swamp Thing.
oh, killing it. And like, it's a joy to see so many young creators coming in with such passion to tell new stories from all over the sort of the sort of whole landscape of comics through this medium. And I think getting a subscription in that way, like suddenly you can find so many people, I'm sure better than me, on there, you know, and just discover your love of comics all over again. I think that's hopefully what some of the silver lining of the terrible
Yeah,
moment
you're
of the
like the
pandemic and
gateway
all that
drug.
is. Yeah, exactly. I'm more than happy to be the gateway drug to better drugs by other people too. So
So very
it's a good
quickly, what
moment
little
all
time
around.
we've got left, Scott, I know you've mentioned meeting up with Ram and people like that. What are you looking forward to personally from this year's San Diego Comic Con?
I mean, that's always the top thing. Like you know, the secret thing that pros love is like I get to see Jock, who I never get to see because, you know, he's over there, and the last years have made it really hard. Our kids play Pokemon together online all the time, but I don't physically see Jock often.
Right.
I have never met Rom, even though I've Zoomed with them multiple times. Like, I haven't had a chance to actually see Lisa, like Tula, in years. You know what I mean? Oh, she actually stopped by New York very quickly, but you know that. So the thing I'm looking forward to is reconnecting with friends, you know, that I haven't been able to see from the pandemic, meeting people whose work I've loved and haven't gotten a chance to meet yet. And honestly, like, I'm one of the people, like, I mean it sincerely. I know it sounds like a sales pitch, but it's not. I mean, I love meeting fans. I really like it. So that's the other thing. I like going and getting to say thanks to the people that, you know, allow me to do this, which is the job I wanted since I was a kid. So it's fun. I enjoy it. I wish you were
Yeah.
going. It would be fun to hang out and finally get
One day, you
to
know,
meet
I
up
wish.
in
Well,
person too.
hopefully, if you get to Thought Bubble, because obviously you didn't make it, and I ended up being at all the right parties last year. I managed to gate crash the comiXology party because I get on very well with Martin Simmons. We're both old punk rockers. So he managed to get me up to the party, and that was a bit of fun. The whole weekend was fun. Yeah, from my point of view, you were sorely missed. So hopefully, if
I'll
you
be
do get
there.
there,
I
if you do
I
get
will.
there, we can have a beer or two.